Two millionaire brothers fought over me. Come in, please, Joey, ordered the strong voice of Charles Astor. As the chief executive officer of Astor Builders, he was an extremely busy man, but as his assistant, I was instrumental in keeping him on task. Your coffee, sir. Just how you like it on a rainy day, sir. Cappuccino, I said, as I placed the mug on my superior's table, which was cluttered with paperwork. How thoughtful of you. Thank you, replied Charles. He then invited me to take the seat across from him so that they could discuss his schedule for the coming week, and some technicalities they had to iron out for the business. Will you be available on the 5th? Asked Charles. I'm planning a short getaway. Indeed I was, but I also was wary of the supposed short getaway he was referring to. Being alone with him for days was the last thing I wanted, especially after realizing that the tension between us was building. So I did what I thought was best. I lied. Unfortunately, I will not be available to assist you, sir. I can call Bryce to check, though. Will you two be alone, or will you need additional staff? I offered. Disappointment was etched on Charles's face upon hearing this, and he shook his head, rejecting my offer of getting other employees to accompany him. He then dismissed me and returned to his work. Was he attempting to get me alone with him? I was not even going to pretend as though I had not noticed the subtle advances towards me in the past few months. Do not get me wrong. Charles was a perfectly pleasant man who seemed to have it all. As the heir of his parents and current CEO of Astor Builders, he was undoubtedly a competent and intelligent business. Above that, he was also quite a dashing man. No wonder plenty of girls in the office had a crush on him. In fact, Joey was certain that those office girls probably envied him for the close connection he has fostered with Charles and the Astor family over the years. That night I clocked out a little later than usual, and was unfortunately stuck in the office lobby as it was raining heavily. I opted against waiting it out any longer and decided to just brave the storm. As I was walking towards the bus stop, a car horn repeatedly sounded, and I turned around to see Charles's Aston Martin. He rolled his window and called out to me. What on earth are you doing, Jay? Hop in, he offered. For a split second I hesitated, but ultimately got in his car. It was just a ride after all. Let me drive you home. You'll get sick walking in the rain, Charles exclaimed. I thanked him profusely as I rode shotgun. I'm drenched. Are you sure it's okay? I asked. Charles nodded and took off his coat. Here, wear this, he said, attempting to put his jacket around me. You'll get cold. Gratefully, I accepted his offer and uttered a quick thanks. The rest of the ride was somewhat awkward, with Charles initiating the majority of the small talk. After years of working with him, Joey could not say he really knew his boss, because Charles was normally very reserved. He was focused on his work and typically kept to himself. However, as of late, he was beginning to see Charles' more playful and outgoing side, which was a joy. You should really consider going on the trip with me, Jay. It will be a great opportunity to get out of the city for a while. You've been working hard too. You deserve it, Charles reiterated before he dropped off Joey. I'll think about it. Thanks for the ride, Joey answered before entering his apartment. While he was thankful for Charles's assistance, he could not help but ponder if there was a reason for his kindness towards him lately. It seems as though Charles was paying more attention to him than usual, or had he been like this all along and Joey was too oblivious? He did not know. The following day, Joey was feeling under the weather, but still came to work, since Charles desperately needed his assistance for a crucial presentation. As the two were prepping the meeting room and Charles' speech, Joey started sneezing, and then came the coughing. Charles glanced at him repeatedly and was increasingly concerned about his assistant. Are you okay, Joey? Do you need to sit for a while? He queried with much concern. I'm okay, Joey forced out before coughing once more. No, sit down and take the rest of the day off. I can handle this. Wait here. I'll make you a cup of tea, insisted Charles. That was new to Joey. For once, Charles was the one servicing him, which was extremely odd. He appreciated his boss's concern, but he was growing suspicious of his behavior. It seemed impossible, but could Charles possibly be worried for Joey more than a boss normally feels about his assistant? The thought was ludicrous. After a few moments, Charles was back with a cup of tea and even some cough droplets. Here, I got you some meds from my personal stash. Drink this and rest up, Jay, Charles ordered as he placed a hand on top Joey's head, as though to gauge his temperature. You're burning up. Go home, Joey. I appreciated his concern and was borderline weirded out by his apparent care for me, being ever so stubborn. However, I simply stayed at my desk and took a nap in an attempt to recover from my sickness. About an hour later, I was awakened by a familiar voice. Joey, are you good? Asked Erik Astor, the younger brother of my boss. Erik was clad in a cool black leather jacket and jeans, a stark contrast from Charles' formal business attires. While the two were alike in the sense that they were both gorgeous, Erik could not be any more different from Charles in terms of personality. While Charles was unusually strict, serious, and ambitious, Erik was more creative, adventurous, and a go-with-the-flow type of guy. Since I go with him better over the past few years, I have grown close to him and even harbored feelings toward the young Astor. Not really feeling well, probably because I was in the pouring rain last night, I explained. Concern was evident on Erik's face as he glanced at me with pity. Tell you what, I'll drop off these papers at the meeting and I'll be right back, he said. He passed by Joey's desk again and then disappeared. When he came back about 15 minutes later, he was carrying some takeout soup and another cup of tea. For you, Erik told Joey. My heart started racing and I could feel butterflies all over my stomach. Admittedly, only Erik could elicit this kind of reaction from me nowadays. In fact, as of late, it was getting harder to conceal my growing admiration for him. I appreciated that despite being from a wealthy and influential clan, Erik remained humble and kind to those around him. While he may have the exterior of an edgy bad boy, he was soft-hearted inside. Thank you, Erik, I mumbled, as I consumed spoonfuls of the soup. What are you doing here? What, I can't visit my favorite assistant? He winked, making me blush. Besides that, I'm here to see my brother. He asked me to drop off some documents for his presentation. I nodded. How's Ruth? I asked casually. Ruth was a stunning redhead girlfriend of a couple of years. Despite the fact that she was always around in the office, I never minded her much since she usually ignores the lowly employees at the Astor buildings. Erik's eyes twinkled at the mention of his partner. Great, Joey, I think I might be proposing. You have to help me think of something extra, he pleaded. I could not help but feel a tinge of disappointment. That was the thing about Erik, he was extremely loyal to Ruth. Anyone would be blessed to have him as their partner, and I could not help but feel envy, but I forced a smile nonetheless. That's amazing, I replied. Sure, let me know what you need. With that, Erik patted my already tousled hair and pinched my cheek. You're the best, Joey. What will we do without you? He said. Here, drink some of this tea. Unbeknownst to us, Charles had just walked out of the meeting room. Didn't like the tea I made you, Jay? He questioned me as he approached my desk, which was adjacent to the meeting room. I smiled awkwardly. Come on, Joey. Likes my tea better, big bro, Erik teased. How was your meeting? Oh, does he really? Well, he should learn to be more appreciative then, especially since I drove him home last night and gave him medicine before he even got here, Charles defended, blatantly ignoring Erik's question. Erik seemed taken aback by his brother's sudden aggression, and so did I. Why was Charles so defensive suddenly? Why was he so hell-bent on proving that he had one-upped his younger brother? Oh there, chill, Joey. You really need to loosen up your boss. He's too uptight, don't you think? Joked Erik. Count on Erik to make jokes at the inappropriate time. Get lost, Erik. Unlike you, Joey and I have more important matters to discuss. Joey, if you could meet me in my office, please, Charles requested before sauntering towards his assigned room. With an apologetic smile, I got up and said my goodbyes to Erik. He's not in the mood today, Erik. I'm sorry. Come back again another time, I offered. Erik chuckled. He's always not in the mood when I'm around, I guess. Better get going too. See you around, Jojo. Feel better, all right? He replied before giving me a tight hug that surprised me. Rarely did Erik give hugs, and most of them were usually directed at his mother or Ruth. He was more of a dap-and-go kind of guy, or sucker for a friendly, not really hugs, so I appreciated it nevertheless. I watched as he exited the office, wistfully looking at him while fully aware that he was probably going home to his gorgeous girlfriend. I sighed and toiled for the rest of the day to keep my mind off Erik. A few days later, I was working late into the night when I heard footsteps on the floor. It was unmistakable that those were high heels, so I flee from the pantry and discreetly took a peek into the empty office. It was Ruth, Erik's girlfriend, and she was heading towards Charles's office. That's odd. He usually did not entertain visitors this late, but I dismissed it and went back to my desk where I worked for a few more minutes before I decided to call it a day. Although I was not certain that Charles knew I was still around, I wanted to say goodbye to him and remind him to lock up. It was past my normal working hours, and I forgot to mention that I was staying late that night, so he probably did not know I was in the vicinity. Never would I have imagined that I would be greeted by the sight of a slightly ajar door and Charles and Ruth kissing passionately. Almost instantaneously, I walked away, but I could hear the sloppy kisses and the moans, even as I was in the hallway. How could this be? The older brother of Erik, whom I had always perceived as a righteous and upright man, was I making out with Ruth? Was this why Ruth was always in the building despite not formally working there? I always thought that she was doing some business errands on behalf of the Astor family, but I knew better now. She was pursuing an affair with her boyfriend's older brother, who also happened to be my boss. My heart dropped. These two betrayed Erik, who had nothing but pure intentions. Just days prior, Erik was enthusiastically telling me of his plans of proposing to Ruth, and tonight, I discovered that she was cheating on him. I felt bad for Erik, and I was in a terrible dilemma throughout that night. Without a doubt, I had to let Erik know before he even proposed to Ruth. He was the kindest and most gentle individual I knew, and certainly did not deserve to be made a fool of. I was still in a state of disbelief the next morning. Unfortunately, Erik also arrived in the office bright and early. He was assisting his brother in a new business endeavor, and he sat with me as he awaited for Charles. Here, I brought you donuts, Joey. You like these, don't you? I remember you downing so many of these at Grandma's party, Erik remarked. Against my will, my heart fluttered, thinking that Erik had remembered a small detail about me. Thanks, Erik, I mumbled. These are so good. Yeah, you better keep those before my brother throws a fit all over me bringing you food again. Why is he always so protective of you anyway? Erik questioned. You reckon he's jealous? My eyes widened at the thought. Jealous of... Our friendship, of course, Erik clarified. And how we're so much closer than you two are, despite him being your boss. I love being your friend, you know? I just laughed it off upon hearing his thoughts. My heart started racing again. This time, I was pondering over what I saw the night before and how to break it off to Erik. Alas, I just decided to be straightforward. Erik, I need to tell you something, I whispered. It's about Ruth. He froze, detecting the seriousness in my tone. You're scaring me, Joey. What is it, though? He asked slowly. Look, I know this is insane, and I don't even know if you believe me, but I saw her and Charles last night. Here in the office, I started. What? I thought she said she was at her friend Diana's house last night for dinner, replied Erik. No, I can't be mistaken, Erik. Her hair and her face are so distinct, and I'm more than positive it was her. It was her that Charles was kissing in his office, I revealed. Erik was dumbfounded, his eyes slightly bulging and his mouth dropping. The silence ensued for a couple of minutes, as though he was taking it in. Thank you, Joey, for telling me. You're a true and loyal friend, he said. I'm so sorry, Erik. I apologize, sincerely. I figured it was better for you to know than after you propose, but trust me on this. I wouldn't break your heart for nothing. No, I completely get it, and I trust you, Joey. You were around in my lowest times. You believed in me when no one else in my family did, and they all thought of me as a waste of space and money. You're the only person here who truly sees me, actually, so I see no point in you making up stories, he said melancholically. I stroked his back in an attempt to comfort him. He flashed a weak smile, but I could see tears welling up in his eyes. He then laid his head on my shoulder and ran my hands through his hair, absent-mindedly. Thank you, he whispered, after a short while. Excuse me, I can't face my brother right now. I'll talk to Ruth first. Will you let him know I'm gone? I nodded and bid him goodbye as we walked out of the office. Charles did not come to work that day either, and I assumed that Erik had confronted him and Ruth already. One thing about Charles is that he never misses a day of work unless it was absolutely important. The next day, Charles was back at work and called me into his office. Close the door, Joey, he instructed. My hands were very clammy at this point and my heart was thumping in my chest. If Erik had already confronted him, it was likely that my name came up. I was prepared to lose my job at this point. After all, it would be worth it if it meant that I saved Erik from her unloyal girlfriend. I don't know if Erik told you already, but he broke off his relationship, Charles announced, and it was because of me. My eyes widened. Erik confronted him after all, but he did not reveal the identity of who witnessed the scandalous happenings in the office. That was very much the character for Erik. He was loyal through and through, and I was not surprised that he protected my identity. I kissed Ruth, Jay, confessed Charles. Props to him. He actually did look remorseful. It was a moment of weakness, and I would undo it. I had pretended like I was in shock too. I don't know what to say, sir. This is really unfortunate. I thought she loved Erik, and honestly, as his brother, you should have known better, I replied honestly. Charles dropped his head and his eyes looked very much weak. The sight shocked me, seeing as he did not normally show his vulnerable side. It was a mistake. I don't even have an interest in her. I kissed her because she was there and it was convenient, he admitted. I never had feelings for her, ever. Are you sure? Because if you had the urge to kiss someone, you must have felt No, because what I feel is for you and you alone. He suddenly dropped. I was baffled by his sudden confession, but in my mind was also putting pieces together. No wonder he was so attentive to my needs and treated me as special compared to his other employees. Charles, this really isn't appropriate and this is absurd, I replied. How, Joey? How? I felt this for you for a while now, he insisted, walking towards me and essentially entrapping me between his large body and the wall. This whole time that I was kissing Ruth, I pictured you in this very office, and with your lips intertwining with mine. No, this is impossible. You're my boss, and I don't feel anything for you, I exclaimed. Not anymore, at least. This time, his face was engulfed with confusion. What? Not anymore, he repeated. I used to harbor a silly crush on you, but not anymore. We were boss and employee, after all, and it was not appropriate. You were also hard to read, seeing you were so reserved, unlike Erik. Unlike Erik, he said in shock. You're comparing me to my twat of a brother who's aimlessly wandering and with no real purpose in life? I pushed him off me at this point, but it was futile since he was much stronger than I was and remained unfazed. Don't talk to him like that, I defended. Erik is more of a man than you'll ever be, and he'll never ever betray you the way you betrayed him. At this point, Charles' eyes turned sinister, and he moved his face even closer to mine, despite his handsome features. I was genuinely terrified at this point. You're defending him over me? You're choosing him over me? He asked menacingly. I love him. I've loved him for a while now. You can never force me to pursue anything with you, because my heart belongs to him, I screamed. Let me go before I cause a scene. Charles pointed a sharp finger at me, but backed off after I turned the tables around and threatened him. How dare you, after everything I've done for you, he retorted. I loved you deeply, and this is how you pay me back? I reached the door and turned the handle. I don't owe you anything. I worked my ass off in this company, but now I know better. I work for a man who is selfish and is only using people for his personal gains. I quit, I said before I slammed the door to his office. After spending the night with Erik, I was prepared to go to the office the next day and get the reminder of my stuff. Erik offered to help me, insisting that he should be there to protect me from his brother. I deeply appreciated Erik's company that night. He willingly listened to me and comforted me. He knew how much I adored my job and how much it pained me to leave my post. Your big loss to Astor Builders, Joey, Erik remarked. They were lucky to have you, especially my brother. He wouldn't be where he is today if it weren't not for you. You're a gem. I flashed him a wide grin. Thank you, Erik. You're too kind, I replied. No, I'm just being truthful. I'd do anything to have someone like you. You're just so full of joy and love, you know, he observed. Anyone would be lucky to have you. I then glanced at him, and he did not realize until then how close his face was to mine. I looked into his magnificent green eyes and was enthralled by them. It took every inch of self-control in me not to kiss him. It was too soon, and I did not want to take advantage of his vulnerability, especially since he had just broken up with Ruth. Nonetheless, I relished his presence and spent the majority of the night chatting with him and forgetting my worries. Fast forward to the next day, and we were both in the office already. I told him to wait in the lobby, not wanting any more drama between Astor brothers in case Charles sees Erik on the premises. After saying goodbye to some of my colleagues, I was ready to head to the lobby to meet Erik again when I saw Ruth storming into the office. She glared at me as soon as she saw me, but then screamed and demanded to see Charles at once. Charles' new assistant summoned the CEO, and he came rushing into the entrance. Come on, Ruth, don't make a scene here, Charles pleaded, aware that his employees were looking at him and his brother's ex-girlfriend. No, I'm done playing your games, Charles. You have not been returning my texts and calls, and now you want me to stay silent? Let's talk here so the whole world can hear what I'm about to say, she snapped. I'm pregnant with your child. What? Charles exclaimed. That's impossible. Oh, trust me, it is. Don't even try to downplay our affair, you sick bastard. You're really still pretending that the kiss was a one-off? Please, Ruth said sassily, as she looked around, relishing the shocked and disturbed looks of Charles's employees. The CEO was evidently embarrassed and clearly wanted to be out of the picture. Get out, he ordered. Out! Ruth sneered at him, and it was then that she spotted me. You're Joey, aren't you? You son of a bitch, she shouted, moving towards me in an attempt to slap me. Luckily, I dodged her, and she was swiftly restrained by Charles afterwards. Stop and get lost, Ruth. Don't drag Joey into this, Charles implored. Ruth's eyes widened upon realization. Son of a bitch, she mumbled. and this time looking straight into Charles. You're defending this gay piece of crap? He's in love with Erik, dumbass. And Erik is now in love with him. Wake up, your assistant is never going to love you. It took me a split second to realize that she was referring to me. My pulse was racing, unable to comprehend the happenings. Charles was also stupefied and loosened his grip on Ruth, as if in disbelief of what he had heard. I can't believe this. This is ridiculous. You and Erik are really pining for this lame guy? You all disgust me, especially you, Charles. I'm here bearing your child and you choose to defend this jackass? Unbelievable. I'm not done with you yet, Charles. Wait and see what I'm capable of. And with that, Ruth walked out. The employees soon disposed and clearly ashamed of the circumstances that just unfolded. Charles locked himself up in his office. I hurriedly left and filled Erik in on the happenings. He was not even surprised that Ruth and Charles had been messing around for a while. He said he had been suspicious of his ex-girlfriend, but dismissed his intuition, thinking that she was merely overthinking. Did she really say I was in love with you? Erik asked once we were back in his apartment, where he offered to cook me some lunch. I nodded and giggled. Silly, isn't it? I asked. Erik shrugged. Not really, he replied, which shocked me. Ruth is a lot of things, but one thing she is not is oblivious. If that's her observation, then maybe there's some truth to it. I was floored, not really knowing how to respond to his low-key confession. However, before I could utter another word, Erik grasped at something on his phone screen. He showed me a tweet of Ruth's where he linked an alleged sex tape of her and Charles. Mama and Papa won't be too happy about this, Erik noted. Charles has caused enough scandal as it is. True enough, it only took a few minutes before Erik's parents called him to discuss his older brother's recently surfaced scandal. I did not mean to overhear the screaming over the phone, but it was evident that the Astors were displeased by the eldest son's behavior. Look, Joey, you can stay, but I have to go home, Erik explained. I really am sorry. I was looking forward to a nice, peaceful night with you, and then this happened. Mama and Papa are enraged and have sacked Charles from his CEO position at Astor Builders. I gasped. What? Yeah, they said that no investors would want to deal with a CEO as dishonorable as him. They want me to go home and discuss the possibility of taking over. I gasped again, but this time with much delight. Erik, this is incredible. I mean, of course, the circumstances are terrible, but you deserve this. I've always felt like you were so hardworking and did not get enough credit. He smiled weakly. It's always tough being in Charles's shadow. I'm nothing but a mere errand boy in my parents' eyes until this moment. But thank you, Joey, for always believing in me. You're welcome, I replied. You're amazing. Don't you forget. Thank you, he whispered, before leaning down and kissing me with so much vigor and passion. I wanted to do that tonight. My fingers went over my lips in disbelief of what just happened. That kiss was one that I've dreamed of for a while now, and never would I have imagined that it would ever occur. Wow, I muttered. Wow indeed, said Erik, before both of us burst into laughter, and then hugged. I intend to do that over and over again, if you let me. I nodded. You're the only person who has ever had unwavering faith in me since the beginning, Joey, and I want to go through this milestone in my life with no one but you. In recent weeks, I worked hard to assist Erik in any way that he could. As the new CEO of Astor Builders, he had a lot of pressure on him, but thankfully, he had plenty of support too. Charles's previous employees had always liked Erik, seeing that he was ever cheerful and amiable, unlike their boss who was more stoic and less friendly. At the same time, Erik and I had started dating. After work every day, we would take me to his apartment to cook for me, before driving me back to my place. It was a small gesture I deeply appreciated. I'm never too busy and too tired for you, he would say. He truly was a dream come true. In retrospect, I never imagined that he would also share an admiration for me. He said so himself. He had always identified as bisexual. So all along, he did try to flirtatiously talk to me, but to no avail. I suppose I was too oblivious previously and focused on my work. Meanwhile, Erik hired me back, but I chose to pursue a mere associate position in the company, as opposed to his personal assistant, in order to prevent a conflict of interest. Thankfully, my colleagues respected my relationship with Erik and trusted that I did not use his feelings for me as leverage in gaining employment. On a sweltering Monday, Erik was scheduled to do his first ever presentation with some major investors. I entered the meeting room early, seeing as I was to do the minutes of the meeting that day. I spotted Erik walking back and forth in front of the room, reciting his speech and attempting to calm himself down. I approached him with a kiss, which he enthusiastically returned. Erik flashed an ecstatic smile at me. but I could detect his nervousness even from afar. "No need to be nervous, Mr. CEO. You will ace this," I assured him. "Thank you, darling," he replied, and placed his forehead against mine. He said, "Doing this aided him in calming down and breathing properly." "Of course I'm rooting for you," I told him, before gently stroking his back. A few moments later, the investors and other exclusives of the company arrived to listen to Erik's presentation. He delivered flawlessly, and the attendees seemed convinced. Even I was impressed by his confidence, and I felt a beam of pride seeing my boyfriend up there. The lighthearted atmosphere soon dissipated, however, when Charles suddenly barged into the room. He entered rather dramatically, clapping slowly and then sneering at his younger brother. "Well done, Erik, well done," said Charles sarcastically. "Your free trial is over, brother. You may have delivered a convincing speech, but you will never be half the CEO I was. So leave." "Mr. Charles Astor, I do not believe this is appropriate. You are interrupting his presentation," Mr. Brickham pointed out. She was one of the higher-ups of Astor Builders and became like a second mother to Erik when he assumed the CEO position. She guided him patiently and rooted for him sincerely. It made sense that she stuck up for him against Charles. "Mrs. Brickham, this man in front of you is nothing but a mere fraud. He's not even that smart, and besides, will you even want a gay man representing the firm? That would be outrageous," Charles argued. Disapproving looks were exchanged in the meeting room. Some looked genuinely disgusted at Charles' homophobic comment, and others were seething. "Charles, I must ask you leave," requested Erik. I was amazed by how he kept his calm and composure despite his older brother's attempt to tear him down. Erik approached him, ready to escort him out. "Oh, please drop the act. We both know you're not even half as good as me to be standing in front of that room. Wasn't it just last month where you were drinking yourself to sleep and whoring around?" Charles accused. "Erik was never like that," I defended. "You just paint him to be this bad, irresponsible boy to make yourself look good. But guess what? You're wrong. He's much more than what you will ever. He's driven, he's kind, he's ambitious, and he's hardworking. And you? You're manipulative, and you only ever use people when you need something from them." Charles laughed. "Oh, look who we have here. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is my brother's boyfriend. What did I tell you? He's gay." I was furious at this point, and despised how Charles used his brother's sexuality against him, as though he himself was not pining after me just weeks ago. "That should never be used as a means of insult, Mr. Astor," berated another investor. "And besides, I don't think your brother's sexuality affects his performance as a CEO. He's perfectly competent from what I have observed." "All of you will regret this. Astor Builders will fall and all of you will go down with it," Charles threatened, upon realizing that all the attendees were siding with Erik. "I believe the only person whose career will be going down is yours, Charles," Mrs. Brickham retorted. "Such behavior should never be tolerated." Charles was then escorted out by security and was banned from the premises from that day onwards. Thankfully, the investors were still impressed by Erik's presentation, despite her brother's ruckus. They were willing to invest more money in Astor Builders, helping it bloom even more. I was extremely proud of my man. Not only did he step up to fulfill a very difficult position, but he even exceeded the expectations. It also touched my heart that many old people stood up for him and did not allow his sexuality to dictate what he was capable of. It was stark contrast to what society normally deemed as boomer mentality. In terms of career, love and family, Erik was blossoming, could not be any prouder to be with him every step of the way. Finally, I could proudly say that the CEO is my boyfriend, and he is also the love of my life. Conclusion. Months later, Erik closed yet another multi-million-dollar deal. Since his leadership at Astor Builders started, the firm had not only been growing in numbers. In fact, they even expanded into a new building since there were so many more employees now. It really helped that they had such a compassionate and humane CEO. A multitude of workers vouched for him and trusted his leadership. The Astor patriarch and matriarch were very proud of their younger son. From his rebellious youth to his bumpy adolescent years, Erik bloomed into a fine young man who exceeded even Charles in terms of hard work and ambition. Erik's mama and papa could not be happier with the child who will eventually inherit all of their millions, and I could proudly state that Erik was deserving of every bit of the recognition. His parents have also warmed up to me. Admittedly, it took them aback that their young son is gay, but after all the scandals involving Charles and Ruth, they knew better than to judge me all because of my sexuality. Eventually, they got to know me better and approved of me. His papa even praised me because he saw how supportive I was of Erik and his endeavors. Similarly, his mama encouraged me to still pursue a career of my own and expressed her support of my success. She said that based on experience, being in the shadow of a CEO is tough, but I must remember not to lose myself in the process. Ruth was nowhere to be found. Shortly after the outrageous claims she posted on social media about Charles, the latter exacted revenge and also slandered her, causing her to lose her job and driving her out of the city. Surprisingly, Charles also found out that Ruth faked her pregnancy all this time and simply wanted to bear an Astor in hopes of inheriting some of their wealth. As for Charles, the last we heard, he was gambling the remainder of his money away in Vegas and was wanted by some loan sharks as he was starting to borrow copious amounts of cash to feed his addiction. Thankfully, he had not tried to ruin his brother again, and besides, Erik had learned and hired more security to protect both of us from his vengeful brother. As of late, Erik and I have moved on to our new penthouse. With my boyfriend's support, I still worked and reached for my own dreams, but I also remember to expand and support my CEO, and together, I know that we will conquer whatever the world throws at us. The end. How do you feel about siblings fighting over the affection of the same individual? Leave a comment and let us know what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.